Former Goldman Sachs executive Raoul Pal published a powerful, data-driven thread on X, which I'm going to share with you in its entirety. And this paints a perfect picture of why crypto markets haven't peaked yet, and the best days for XRP are yet ahead. I firmly believe XRP absolutely will have that euphoric blow-off top that melts faces, the one that we've been waiting the better part of a decade for. It makes no sense to believe that it's not going to happen. And Raoul Pal, he's the reason that I understand what the most powerful metric is in tracking macro moves. And look, and it's a primary reason I have such high confidence that this market cycle absolutely is not over. Not yet. And he also has a rather compelling explanation as to why this market cycle is taking longer to play out than previous ones. And you'll see that he has no shortage of confidence that this cycle is not over and that we absolutely currently are not in bubble territory, despite what many would have you believe on social media. Paul, of course, is one of the most famous figures in all of crypto, and I will say that his large following of 1.2 million followers on X is absolutely well-deserved. I've learned a ton from this guy over the years. Former Goldman Sachs executive. He's also the founder and CEO of Global Macro Investor and Real Vision. And it doesn't hurt that he's also been an XRP holder for about half a decade at this point. And so let's go ahead and run through this thing. What's on your screen right now is the NASDAQ 100, and it's an index which is tech heavy. It's in the stock market, of course, just to be super clear. Some of the most popular indexes out there, of course, NASDAQ 100, Russell 2000, S&P 500, and they're all useful to track for varied reasons. Russell 2000, of course, is small cap stock, so as people are more and more willing to take on more risk, go further out the risk curve, they'll purchase the Russell 2000 or an ETF that tracks the Russell 2000, because the Russell 2000 itself is just an index, of course. And as it happens, that's a signal of an increased willingness to take on risk. That's the reason that we track that, is because when that happens historically, every single time that happens, there's an alt season. Every single time you've seen an explosion for that happens every several years, there's been an absolute explosion for altcoins. That's why we track that. But there's further correlations with the S&P 500 and also the NASDAQ 100. And frankly, the NASDAQ 100, there's a real noticeable corollary there. Not surprisingly, because obviously, when you think of crypto, obviously tech, and the NASDAQ 100 itself is a tech-heavy index. And so that's what's on your screen right here, going back to the 80s, actually. And Raoul Pal wrote, "No, it's not a bubble in tech stocks. We are less than one standard deviation from the trend. You can see what a bubble looks like in the late 1990s when we exploded out of the decade-long log regression channel to be multiple standard deviations from trend." And if you're looking at the screen, it's clear as day. You can see what happened with the dot-com boom and then ultimate bust. Many, many standard deviations above the trend. And he's noting where we are right now. He's like, guys, not even close. We're less than one standard deviation from this particular trend. He's insisting this absolutely is not a bubble, and thus it's one more reason that you can look at to say, yeah, we're not entering a bear market. This is not the end of the cycle. It's just one more thing that you can look at. And then he wrote, also, but PE ratios are at bubble valuations narrative doesn't take into account the fact that during debasement, the P rises due to debasement more than E, which is anchored by GDP growth in general. If debasement is 11% and GDP is 2% trend over same period, then PE rises by 9%. Yeah, and so that makes sense as well. That's just kind of common sense and easy to understand. And then he says, this means that PE ratios double over 8 years or so. It's the denominator effect. Also, Bitcoin is less than one standard deviation from trend. It usually hits 2 standard deviations. This is driven by the ISM, which is the business cycle. That's what this black line is on your screen right here in this chart. He says, this is driven by the ISM business cycle being lackluster so far. And you could obviously see the correlation there. And I've been talking about this on and off in videos where I'm talking about what's happening within the market, and I can't break down in substantial detail what happens in every single video. But this is what I've been referencing right here. This is it literally right here. And we have never had the end of a market cycle in crypto without this thing getting cranked up. And so, when people say this time is different, well, okay, so you could say this time is different if we're no longer in a 4-year cycle and it's extended into 5 years. Well, this time is different then. Well, is it though? Because that's not the metric that is of most importance. What controls the cycle is global liquidity, and that ultimately impacts, of course, ISM, the business cycle. And so if you didn't see that thing rampage to the upside this cycle, then this time would be different. And whether that happens now or in 2026, like Raoul Pal thinks is likely to happen, it doesn't matter. As long as it happens, then it's the same. What would be different is if it doesn't happen. And so people, instead of focusing on that, they'll look at the time frame and see, well, if he's right, it goes into 2026 and this time is different. I'm like, no. You're not looking at the right metric. It's not a this time is different type of situation if it extends into 2026 because of this. And that's why I keep highlighting this. And then he says, which in turn is driven by less need to add liquidity in the U.S. due to most debts extending to 5 years and needing to be rolled over next 12 months. Right. So if there's an extension rather than 4 years, 5 years, 5-year cycle now, as far as when debt needs to be refinanced, what do you think that does to liquidity? It delays it. That's the point that he's making right here. It's a key point within his argument here. So again, he says, which in turn is driven by less need to add liquidity in the U.S. due to most debts extending to 5 years and needing to be rolled over in the next 12 months. That's $10 trillion. Folks, do you see? This is why I find his argument compelling. We'll find out if it's true and if it's right as time passes, but I do find it compelling. I know it's a minority opinion here, but I do find it compelling. $10 trillion. What do you think happens as that gets refinanced? Like, folks, you understand how much more money is going to be sloshing around here? You see how that impacts the business cycle, and you see how that impacts people's attitudes towards investing in risk-on assets like stocks and crypto? Duh, right? So whether or not this happens, you can see the logic behind it at least, right? Easy to see. And then he says, thus, the bulk of liquidity is delayed and forward-looking indicators suggest it lies ahead. Financial conditions give us a 3-month lead. And that, in turn, leads to ISM, which again is the business cycle. And that's what's on your screen again right here, this black line right here. The liquidity leads exactly to this. That's why I keep highlighting this. I do find it compelling. And so if this plays out, I mean, to just look at whatever's happening in the charts and being like, oh, everything's bearish now. I'm like, you're so sure? What about macro conditions here? Does any of this matter? I think it does. I find this very compelling. And if you have a case against this, like, I'm all ears. Articulate something. Like, I'm absolutely willing to hear out anybody that thinks that this doesn't make sense. I haven't seen a good argument against this. Like, and I'm looking for it. Like, I look for thoughtful discourse on social media, because brilliant guys like this who are data driven, have decades long experience, actually do share what they think. And if I can find a strong argument against this, I'll share it on the channel. Like, because look, I want to share diverse viewpoints. I'm not just going to lock into something and then only share whatever that thing is to keep driving that point. I just want to believe whatever's true. And I hope you guys are the same on that. Whatever is true, whether it's good news, bad news, that's what I want to believe, because I want to live within the confines of reality. That's my goal. I want to believe as many true things in life as possible. That's that. I haven't seen yet a good argument against this particular thesis. And then he says, in that all drives number go up. NASDAQ 100 NDX has a slight premium currently, but that is normal at this phase. And that's correct. Look at the pink line. That's the NASDAQ 100. And then you've got liquidity here in black. So yes, NASDAQ 100 currently above it. But go back to last cycle. Same story. It was only true until suddenly it wasn't, right? And then look at the cycle before that. Same story. NASDAQ 100. Look at that. Has a lead. Then you go back to cycle before that. Same thing. Same thing happened then too. Go back multiple cycles. So this part actually is the same. So if we just have a lengthening cycle having to do with debt refinancing, which drives global liquidity and as a result, the business cycle, then all of this makes sense. You see why I'm taking the time to share this with you? Because most people don't understand this. And this thesis, I mean, it's fairly popular in crypto just because Raoul Paul's talking about it, but most people in crypto have no idea what this is. They have no freaking clue. They have no earthly idea. They just see a bunch of gibberish on a screen when they look at this. And that's why I'm going to take the time to talk about this, because if you're like me and what matters most is XRP rocketing and melting faces, then we need to not be in a bear market. We need to not be in a bubble. We need to rampage higher. And yeah, I want that to be true, but is it logical to believe that's what's probable? I still argue yes. I firmly do. And this is a great argument in that favor. So that's why I'm taking the time to make this video. If you want XRP to melt faces and get you filthy rich, well, this is the type of thing where if he's correct, this is what's going to get us here, because we're going to have a full-blown frickin' alt season sooner rather than later if this is indeed the case. Then he says, and Bitcoin usually decouples to the upside too at this point in the cycle. And look, this chart's going back to 2013. So you've got Bitcoin in pink and you got total liquidity in black. And look at this. It just is the case. You do see Bitcoin decouple. Go back last cycle. I say decouple. It's on a, and he says it, but it's over a very short time frame, not permanently. It's not like it's just people have this idea of like, oh, it's decoupled, and then it just, you never see a strong correlation. No. That's not what he's arguing. You can decouple, and then you can see a strong correlation again after that, which absolutely is what this chart shows. So you can look back last market cycle, same thing happened. Look at the cycle before that, and even the one before that, going back to 2013. It's the same damn thing. So we're at the phase right here. Fishery's going to rhyme with itself as you would expect it to, based on global flows and macro trends. It does make sense that we, although we haven't seen a burst, it makes sense that we'd be at the phase where it's about to happen. That's what he's arguing here. And then take a look at this one. This kind of matters more than a little bit. NASDAQ 100, and the NDX, of course, the ticker symbol, and NASDAQ 100, which you call a bubble, has a correlation of 96%, and Bitcoin 90%. And a correlation, it says here, so it's GMI Total Liquidity Index. That's what he's talking about right here. That's a big ass correlation right there. So I understand, obviously, it's true that correlation does not necessarily mean that there's some sort of causation here, but here I think there's a freaking causation. You know, I just got a little hunch here, folks. I got a little bit of a baby boo hunch here. Just a little tiny baby boo hunch. Then Raoul Paul also continues and says, which makes total global liquidity the most dominant macro factor maybe in the history of markets. This is driven by demographics, which drives debt. And folks, that's why I keep saying what I'm saying. When it comes to understand what's happening in markets, including on a macro level, there is no one single metric that's the end-all be-all, and I'm not claiming that the business cycle is, or any sort of metric like global M2 or anything of the sort, but I am saying that that's about as close as you're going to get. That really is. That's why when he says here, which makes total global liquidity the most dominant macro factor maybe in the history of markets. Yeah, exactly. And I recognize that, and that's why I've said, look, I've been saying it for like months now. I've been saying there's no end-all be-all metric, but this is as close as you're going to get. That's why. And Raoul Paul is effectively arguing the same thing. Yeah, that's the dominant factor right there, 100%. And then he says, and debt drives liquidity via debasement. But this is not just a U.S. game. Back in